Perfectly balanced. So far, let's keep it going. Hey, no stopping.
Oh, duh! Whoa, Emily! You've got to stop startling me like that. Oopsie, like, sorry. It's fine. How are you so good at that? Dunno. I got you something totes fetch. You're gonna so love it. It's so lit. What's that? Like, I know you're like such a total fan of this show, so I thought I'd like scoop it up for you, you know? Since we're like BFFs and stuff. Thanks, Em. That's actually really nice of you. Wait, this is a Nintendo published Switch game. You spent $60 on me. Uh-huh. Where did you even get that kind of money? Like, I don't know. It was just like in my wallet suddenly and junk.
Oh, come on!
You've got to stop doing that. Oops, like gag me. Hello, mortals. Welcome back. You all like that? I'm trying it out. Want to see if I can get a catchphrase going. Anyway, DC Superhero Girls Teen Power is a game with a really long title that I am not going to say in full over and over again for the sake of brevity. It's also a game that, upon being announced during a certain Nintendo Direct, had my attention from the start, given I'm a big fan of the show that it's based on. Plus, I have an affinity for licensed games, if you couldn't tell. DC Superhero Girls, the second generation show, not the first one, is a show I would recommend. I watched it on recommendation from a good friend of mine. Since a good percentage of the episodes were on Netflix, I really had nothing to lose. Long story short, I essentially binged all of the show that was available to me, and I loved it. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend it's a Last Airbender in terms of fantastic quality, but it's nice, comfy fun. It makes me happy, and honestly, I think that's more than enough. So when a game was announced, I was immediately interested and decided to pre-order it the same day I pre-ordered Resident Evil 8. If that isn't a perfect way to describe the clashing interest I have, I don't know what is. And then on June 4th, it came out and I began to play. I knew going in, I wanted to make a video on this. I wanted to make a video on this before the game even came out. This is because I had doubts that anyone else would. And if they did, they probably wouldn't do it in the way that I would. And you know what they say, if you want something done the way you want it to be done, it's best you do it yourself. My hope with this video is that it can be used as a resource for two kinds of people. Adult fans like me who are wondering if they should even bother with this game, especially since it's a Nintendo published first party, quote unquote, Switch game that will more than likely never leave the $60 price range, or if it does, it'll take 4 years. So they're wondering if they'll get their money's worth out of it. And then there's also parents of kids who are fans of the show who might be curious if they should pick it up. Unfortunately, I'm not sure how many people in that second category would even be watching this video, considering that when I was originally planning for this video, it was supposed to come out in June, the same month the game came out. If plans go accordingly, this video will be out in September, which is about 2 months after my original month plan for this video. So I assume if you're watching this video at this point, you're either an adult fan who was looking for a legitimate video to gauge if they should buy it or not, or you're watching this because I linked it in one of the Discord servers I'm in and you watched it out of curiosity. Heck, you could be a friend of mine. Hi if you are. Point is, I still want to make this video, even though my original intention is sort of muddied given how late this video is coming out. So let's stop beating around the bush and get right to it. Now, starting out with the game, I want to immediately point out that this show is very early DC Superhero Girls in terms of how it's written. Not so early that it's Gen 1 early, but I mean like early Gen 2. There's a lot of things that hint at it. For example, Carol's default outfit in this game is her red outfit from her premiere episode, as opposed to the pink outfit that she wears for the rest of the series. Another thing that feels like the beginning of the show is how this game's plot mirrors the pilot in a lot of ways, specifically the way that the plot twist goes on and how that plot twist is basically the exact same plot twist from that pilot. It makes me wonder how long this game's been in development. Perhaps it's been something that's been planned since before the show even officially premiered. They might have only had design documents and a couple early episodes to go off of. That would make a lot of sense and explain a lot of things. Honestly, I think that approach ended up working in the game's favor. It allows for it to be a solid entry point if you aren't familiar with the show, without dumping a bunch of later show stuff on you. Also, another thing is the game seems to think Jess and Carol don't know that they're a Green Lantern and a Star Sapphire respectively, when episodes like It's Complicated show that this is definitely not the case. Especially since Jess and Hal know one another's identities, and thus she'd have to know Carol's, given half of Hal's problems are Carol-based, which gives more fuel to my idea that this game was planned and being worked on very early in the show's lifespan, because if this took place later on in Season 1, more than likely this wouldn't be a thing I'd have to point out. I'm info dumping. I do that. I'm sorry. I should stop. Moving right along, another thing I want to immediately mention is that the game's visual style, while capturing the show's look in 3D, has problems. For starters, all the NPCs look like bland, off-brand characters from the show rather than actual characters from the show. Most of the main characters look good in 3D. Most of them, except Harley. She looks weird to me. And I have no idea why I feel like this, but she just doesn't look right to me. Maybe it's her proportions don't translate well into 3D, I don't know. But most of the characters look good in this style. I think so anyway. It's not a very high-end game in terms of either budget or visuals, but I think it looks fine, especially since the show it's based on has a very simple, flat art style. It's charming and captures the show's aesthetic pretty well. Back on those NPCs I mentioned earlier, I have no idea who made the creative decision to decide that only named characters get fully voiced lines and cutscenes, and background characters just get noises, like this is Punch Time Explosion or something. There are scenes where characters like Supergirl or Catwoman talk, and then they're immediately followed up by some rando going "Yar!" or whatever. I assume this game wasn't exactly high budget, I mentioned that earlier, but this solution doesn't work for me. If that's the reason, then just make it so only some cutscenes are voiced and then others aren't, or get someone you have on hand to record extra dialogue for background characters. It takes me out of the experience when one character says a full-on sentence and then the character that immediately follows it up makes one noise and then I have to read a bunch of text with no voice acting. If it was consistent, I'd be able to get into it, but it's not. Again, the presentation in general is kind of hit or miss for me. Like I said, I think the game captures how the characters look pretty well in 3D, even if I don't think all of them translate well to 3D. But for everything like that, there's always something like the way the cutscenes are handled and how only named characters give fully voiced dialogue and then background characters get noises, which is also awkward. But the way the cutscenes are presented in general feel very budgety. I can't say for certain, but that's just the vibe I get. Not a big deal. I sort of went into this game expecting it to be a little low budget feeling. I was right, but the cutscenes are weird since characters only have a handful of animations or expressions that they use during these scenes, even the fully named ones. Cutscenes are not the game's strong suit, at least not visually. Writing-wise, the scenes feel in line with how the show felt during its earlier episodes, and I think it works for what it's doing. All the voice acting is good for the voice acting that's there. All the actors from the show came back to play their characters, which is always nice to hear. You take the good with the bad, basically. You know, now might be a good time to get off presentation and to talk about the actual story of the game. There's not a whole lot here to talk about. I mean, there's a story, and spoilers if you care about that sort of thing, because I'm going to go into them. So the setup is that Hobbs Bay is destroyed during an attack at the start of the game, and the rest of the story has Lex Luthor and his infinite wealth working to rebuild the bay with help from our heroes as part of a fundraising type deal. Things go sideways as evil toys attack, several events meant to help progress the rebuilding event, and at first the girls think it's Livewire, especially since she lies and claims that it's for clout. But after being defeated, she reveals that she lied about that and gets exposed on Twitter.com, and that leads the girls back to square one before eventually discovering that the person behind the evil toys is that guy who was dressed like a supervillain and was selling toys on the street earlier, and he had fully voiced dialogue like every other major character. Which seems obvious, and is obvious especially if you're familiar with the show, and had the same response I did when I first saw him, That being, wait, you're not in the show? And then you proceed to Google DC Toyman, only to discover he is indeed a villain from DC history that is being reinvented for this game. The show did this a lot. A good example of that is Cavalier, which is my favorite example to bring up, of the show pulling out obscure DC characters and using them. Toyman being used for this game feels very in line with the show. Something funny to mention as well is that Toyman's first appearance in the universe isn't in the show, but in this game. But this video took so long to come out that by the time I got around to recording this, Winslow Schlott, I've never known how to say that guy's last name, has shown up in Season 2. To be fair, the Toyman in this game isn't called Winslow, and the game was made before Season 2, and I assume it was being developed before Season 1 even finished, so I assume what happened was that they went through DC history, found a villain that they could use, and then used him. But since the Winslow in the show is so radically different from the Toyman in this game, that technically means there's two guys who fit the Toyman description in this universe. You know, unless the game isn't canon. Haven't gotten the chance to watch Season 2 yet, since it hasn't been added to Netflix, so maybe the events of the game are referenced in the show at this point. I wouldn't know. Anyway, enough of the detour, let's get back on track. The game tries to make you believe that Lex is the one pulling the strings behind Toyman at one point, and then just as quickly shoots that idea down before eventually revealing at the tail end that Toyman's boss was Lena Luthor, his sister. Remember when I mentioned earlier that the game's plot twist is straight up the same one from the pilot special? Yeah, this is that twist, and I feel like an absolute idiot for not seeing it coming from a mile away. But considering how little she's used in the actual show, I completely forgot she existed and wasn't expecting them to pull her out again. Especially to do a twist that they had already done in the show. I mean, it's in character for her, for sure, given her bitter resentment towards her brother and teenagers in general. So I'm not knocking the game for that on principle, it fits perfectly, but it's just so weird because it's the exact same basic plot that the pilot did, just stretched out a little to meet the runtime of a game. I honestly prefer Toyman's bit in the plot. It feels a bit more unique and like this is an episode of the show, rather than it feeling like a retread of the pilot. I need to get off that. I can't beat the dead horse that the plot repeats the pilot's plot twist, but it's just something that stuck out with me and I haven't stopped thinking about it since I finished this game. Also doesn't help that I don't have much else to say in terms of plot. Outside of like a base synopsis, there's nothing really to write home about, and it feels, while right at home in the show, in terms of tone and comedy and general dialogue, parts of this plot do feel like it's retreading already seen ground. And while I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt that it was probably being developed very early in the show's lifespan, it doesn't stop me as a fan of the show from feeling like I've been here before. If, you know, this is your first exposure to the show, then you probably won't get that same feeling, and, you know, that's fine. But as a returning fan, it's just weird for me. Let's move on from plot into gameplay, and I should start with the playable characters. The game starts you with Babs, you know, Barbara Gordon, Batgirl. And then after a bit gives you Kara, aka Supergirl, and then after her you get Diana, aka Wonder Woman, and then there you go. These are the three heroes you get to play in this game. Yep, in a show that has 6 main heroes, you only get to play 3 of them. If your favorite member of the team is Karen, Jess, or Z, too bad, they aren't playable and never become playable. Unrelated, but Z's my favorite superhero girl, and I was, to say the least, disappointed to learn I couldn't play her, but details. At least I was able to take pictures of her with Kara using the game's photo mode. We should move on. The 3 hero girls you can actually play do feel unique enough from one another that I've gained a favorite to play, which is Supergirl out of the 3. Their movesets put you in their shoes pretty well, and as you level them up, you can unlock a few new moves that help cement that more. You can unlock stuff like Kara's Ice Breath, which I used to cheese the game a lot, Diana's Lasso of Truth, and Barbara's Batarangs, among other things. It's a simple 3D beat 'em up. It's not super mechanically deep, you're not gonna get a Devil May Cry here, and you really shouldn't be expecting that kind of depth from this game. It's simple, but it's fun enough that it keeps the combat from getting repetitive and samey, even if it lacks the depth of its more highbrow contemporaries. It helps that all 6 of the playable characters feel unique to themselves, and thus as the game goes, you can freely switch between them and never get bored of the repetitiveness that would come if you were stuck playing only one at a time. And yes, I did say 6, because while only 3 of the hero girls are unlockable, there are 3 villains that you can unlock later. Of course, this starts with Harley Quinn. She's an exceptionally popular character, but after her you also unlock Selena and then Carol. Carol's my favorite of the villains to play, and that might be because she's sorta similar to Kara. She's not too similar, she has her own abilities, but both of them can fly and have the same mobility, which makes them the most fun to play for me. Details. And like the heroes, only 3 of the 6 villains are playable. So if your favorite villain girl is Livewire, Poison Ivy, or Giganta, then I apologize for your loss. However, this does get you up to 6 playable characters in total, which is a solid amount for variety's sake. And again, the movesets of the characters are solid enough at separating them from each other. I found myself choosing certain girls for certain missions. And I'm not talking about the missions where you're required to play a certain girl. I mean the ones where they kind of let you choose whoever. And doing that helped lower the repetition, which is good. And it also could help make missions easier. I didn't personally ever struggle with the game, given I'm a 22-year-old woman whose favorite games include Devil May Cry 5 and Hades. It's not piss easy, mind you, and playing mindless with no thought won't get you very far. But it's nowhere near hard, which I don't see as a problem. It's a game based on a children's cartoon that's primarily aimed at those kids. So the game having an easier style challenge makes sense to me. Like I said, it's not piss easy. It doesn't treat its player like an idiot who just needs to mash buttons randomly with no rhyme or reason. But it's not so hard that I can't imagine a child playing this game. It's a fair challenge, I feel. It's kind of hard for me as a 22-year-old woman to really gauge how challenging this would be to someone of a much younger age. But for me, I thought it gave a decent enough challenge without ever getting too hard. It's a solid gateway to 3D beat 'em up type games, and I can imagine a lot of kids having fun with this. Which, you know, is the main demographic of this game, so that's a good thing. To rank the characters based on how much I played them, as previously stated, Kara and Carol were my favorites. I found them to be the most comfortable to play, and I ended up using them whenever I was allowed to. Diana's under them, and then Barbara with Selena, and then Harley at dead last because I am not very fond of how she plays when compared to the others. Like at all. Nothing against Harley, I just didn't like her moveset all that much. I think part of why I like Kara and Carol so much is, like I said, they can fly, which made them perfect for missions with time limits, plus Carol's attacks being mostly long range made them more annoying enemies less annoying because they literally couldn't get to me. Of course, combat's only one half of the gameplay, because while the characters feel very different in combat, they're very similar in teen mode, which is when you're in your civilian identities and going around Metropolis. The overworld sections are significantly more low-key when compared to the combat. The camera is much closer in on your character as opposed to the superhero gameplay. It's like the difference between KH2's camera and Birth by Sleep's camera. While exploring Metropolis, you have 3 hub worlds to explore. Those being Old City, which is the main city seen in the show, and also has an extended underground sewer area now. The High School, which is the smallest area. You're only allowed to explore the front parking lot, which was disappointing because you can't go to the football field or even inside the school outside of going immediately to Lois's office, which is always a cutscene area you cannot explore. As a fan of the show, I felt a little disappointed that I couldn't explore the school, which is where a good percentage of episodes happen. But it's not that big a deal, at least not to me. And then finally there's Hobbs Bay, which is more in line with Old City. It could change slightly based on what buildings you decide to add over the course of the main story. The area of Hobbs Bay, because of this, changes the most over the course of the game, going from completely destroyed to a thriving city anyone would kill to live in, relatively speaking. You can actually unlock buildings to add to the bay from doing side missions, and during the story when the robot asks what you'd like to build, you can choose any of the options you have unlocked as long as you have the proper amount of coins. It's not much, but it's nice to have a small effect on the base repair. Helps with immersion, but it's not a lot, and unless I miss something, there's no way to add more buildings outside of the allotted amount given during the story. So if you aren't doing side stuff progressively over the course of the game, you're more than likely not going to be able to use a vast majority of the buildings you unlock, which sucks. Another thing you can unlock are outfits, and those are much more flexible in use. I don't just mean outfits for the girls to sport in their everyday lives, although there's plenty of outfit pieces to buy that you can mix and match for totally fashionable, creative costumes. But you can also buy alternate costumes for their superhero alter egos. And these costumes are full costumes. They aren't like pieces of suits that you can put together. No. These are full-on outfits based on different looks for the characters from other continuities. I didn't go into this game expecting to see stuff like New 52 Wonder Woman and Justice League animated Supergirl or the OG Star Sapphire costume. This was cool stuff. Earlier I mentioned the overworlds, and they're not super big sandboxes. You aren't getting a sleeping dogs, you're getting more of a sitting ducks. But there's still stuff to explore. You can find things like cameras, extra missions, hamster toys, and graffiti based on the 6 heroes and 6 villains in our main cast, which are all part of that additional side content I mentioned earlier. The way the open world is structured, it's just so reminiscent of Sitting Ducks. I'm sorry I bring it up again, and I know only 5 of you even know what I'm talking about, but it's just that's all it makes me think of. Even the camera perspective makes me think of that. Anyway, the overworld is where you'll not only find additional content like those collectibles and missions, but it's where you'll find the clothing stores for both civilian outfits and the alternate super suits, as well as VR mode. No, it's not a literal VR mode that takes advantage of the Labo system. It's an in-game VR mode that allows you to explore areas freely as any playable hero or villain, as well as letting you replay previous missions you've already completed, and has tutorials as well. You might find yourself wanting to replay missions, given each mission not only has a hidden golden hamster which is attached to ongoing side quests, but also each mission ends with a final rank, like a level in Sonic or Devil May Cry, that allows you to unlock extra EXP or coins if you achieve certain goals, like keeping a certain amount of health, beating it under a certain time, stuff like that. EXP is used to upgrade the 6 girls, increasing their health as well as various combat aspects, including unlocking new moves, which I briefly touched upon earlier. Honestly, going into this game, I was not expecting the amount of content the game ends up having. I wasn't expecting light RPG elements. I wasn't expecting so much extra collectibles or side missions that motivate me to explore the admittedly very bland but not terrible hub world. I wasn't expecting the combat to include a combo counter that increases in level, very much like a style ranking, like in Devil May Cry. I promise I'm gonna stop bringing up Devil May Cry at some point. It's just my go-to example. I wasn't expecting alternate costumes based on the older comics or continuities. I don't want to drag this video out. My goal with this video was to just talk about the game and put out my thoughts. I don't want to drag this out, and I don't want to end up repeating myself because I have a bad habit of doing that. When I finished this game's story, there was still plenty of side content left for me to tackle. I haven't gotten any of that because a bunch of other games have come out and I have a very large backlog I need to get to. But I left the game feeling like I just played a pretty nice game. Not something that'll win awards or be remembered as one of the greatest classics of this generation, but like a surprisingly good licensed game from the PS2 era, something I have an affinity for if you've noticed at this point. So I had a lot of fun with this game, and I think fans of this show will have fun with it as well, especially younger fans whose parents might have found this video on complete accident out of curiosity to see if the game's worth picking up. In short, it's very mediocre. It won't change your life. But if you like the show and you're interested, you'll probably have fun with it like I did. Maybe don't spend $60 on it like Emily did. Maybe don't do that. But if you do end up doing that, do know that there's quite a bit of content here, so it's not like you'll be done with it in like a week.
Hey, Dove, have you seen Emily? I think she borrowed my wallet again.
Huh? Oh, yeah, she did.
Jeez. Do you know how much she took?
$60 American.
She stole my wallet to buy you a game again, didn't she?
Don't blame me. Her mixing up her wallet with yours is not my problem.
Her wallet is pink and bedazzled. How the heck does she mix it up with mine?
Might I suggest a chain wallet?
Oh, whatever, I'm going for a swim.
Okay, stay safe.